There exists a hunter in the world who does not stalk with weapons or traps, but with charm. They do not track footprints through forests, but vulnerabilities through conversations. And their preferred prey is not the weak or the wounded, but the most perceptive among us. Those who feel too much, see too clearly, and love too deeply. If you have ever wondered why your greatest gift seems to invite your greatest suffering, then what I am about to reveal will disturb you. But it will also liberate you. You see, there is a predator that walks among us, one that feeds not on flesh but on essence, not on blood but on belief. They are drawn to a very specific type of person, and that person is you. The highly sensitive soul, the one who feels the room's energy before anyone speaks. The one who notices the tremor in a voice that others miss entirely. The one whose heart opens like a door that has forgotten how to lock itself. But before we descend into the psychology of this ancient dance between hunter and hunted, let me make something clear. This is not a story about victims and villains in the way you might expect. This is a story about unconscious contracts written in the language of need. This is about how your deepest strength becomes the very map that leads predators to your door. And most importantly, this is about why understanding this dynamic is the first step toward reclaiming the power you never knew you had surrendered. What I am about to share with you comes from years of studying the patterns that emerge when sensitivity meets manipulation, from observing the subtle choreography that unfolds when someone who feels everything encounters someone who feels nothing, from witnessing how the most beautiful qualities of the human spirit can become weapons in the wrong hands, but also from understanding that knowledge, when wielded with awareness, transforms victims into victors. The predator I speak of does not announce themselves with violence or obvious aggression. They do not wear masks or lurk in shadows. Instead, they wear the face of understanding. They speak the language of connection. They offer what appears to be the very thing you have been searching for your entire life. Someone who sees you, someone who gets you, someone who finally understands the depth of your inner world. But what you are witnessing is not recognition, it is reconnaissance. What feels like soul-deep connection is actually surgical precision. They are not seeing you, they are scanning you, mapping your emotional landscape like a territory to be conquered. Learning the architecture of your heart so they can later exploit every room, every hidden passage, every secret entrance you never knew existed. This is not about conscious evil, though the effects can be devastating. Most of these individuals are not sitting in dark rooms plotting your destruction. They are operating from their own unconscious programming, their own survival mechanisms that learned long ago how to extract what they need from others. They are masters of a craft they never consciously chose to learn. They are artists of manipulation who paint with the colors of your own emotions. The highly sensitive person becomes their ideal target, not because of weakness, but because of strength. Not because of what you lack, but because of what you possess in abundance. You have something they desperately need, but cannot generate within themselves. You have an emotional richness, an inner vitality, a capacity for genuine feeling that they can only access through you. You become their emotional lifeline, their proxy for the human experience they cannot fully inhabit on their own. Think about this for a moment. What makes someone highly sensitive? It is the ability to perceive subtleties that others miss, to feel the emotional undercurrents in any situation, to sense when something is not quite right, even when you cannot name what that something is. You are equipped with internal radar systems that can detect deception, manipulation, and hidden agendas from remarkable distances. So why then do you so often find yourself ensnared by the very people your intuition warned you about? Why does your gift of perception seem to fail you precisely when you need it most? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Your sensitivity is not failing you, it is being turned against you. The predator understands something about highly sensitive people that most highly sensitive people do not understand about themselves. They know that your greatest strength is also your greatest vulnerability. Your ability to feel deeply means you can be made to feel deeply. Your capacity for empathy means you can be made to empathize with their pain, their story, their manufactured vulnerability. Your desire for authentic connection means you can be seduced by the promise of finally being understood. They study you the way a scientist studies a specimen. They learn what makes you light up, what makes you withdraw, what triggers your compassion, what activates your guilt. They discover which words unlock your defenses and which behaviors earn your trust. They become students of your particular psychology, and they are remarkably dedicated students. But here is what makes this dynamic so insidious. They do not approach you as predators. They approach you as fellow wounded souls. They present themselves as kindred spirits who have also suffered, who also understand what it means to feel too much in a world that feels too little. They mirror your sensitivity back to you, creating the illusion that you have found your emotional twin. This mirroring is not accidental, it is strategic. They have learned that highly sensitive people are often starved for genuine understanding. You have spent your life feeling like an alien in a world that seems emotionally colorblind. You have been told you are too much, too intense, too deep. You have learned to hide your true nature to avoid rejection or ridicule. So when someone appears who not only accepts your sensitivity, but celebrates it, who claims to share it, your defenses do not just lower. They collapse entirely. What you do not realize is that you are witnessing a performance, a carefully crafted presentation designed to activate your deepest longings. They are showing you a reflection of yourself, but it is a funhouse mirror that distorts reality while appearing to reveal truth. They are offering you the experience of being seen, but what they are actually doing is seeing through you. This is where the dance begins. The predator presents themselves as emotionally available, deeply feeling, perhaps even more sensitive than you are. They share stories of their own pain, their own struggles with being misunderstood. They create a sense of shared victimhood, a bond forged in the fires of mutual suffering. You begin to feel that you have found your tribe, your person, your home, but something else is happening beneath the surface of this apparent connection. While you are opening your heart, sharing your deepest truths, revealing your most vulnerable places, they are cataloging information. Every fear you confess becomes a button they can push later. Every insecurity you reveal becomes a weapon they can wield against you. Every dream you share becomes a carrot they can dangle to keep you engaged. The relationship that follows is unlike anything you have experienced before. It is intense beyond measure. It feels fated, destined, written in the stars. You have never felt so understood, so accepted, so completely seen. The connection is electric, consuming, all-encompassing. You find yourself thinking about them constantly, craving their presence, feeling incomplete when they are not around. But this intensity is not love, though it wears love's clothing. This is not connection, though it mimics connection perfectly. This is energetic feeding. You are being consumed, but the consumption is so gradual, so sweetly disguised, that you mistake it for nourishment. You are being drained, but the draining feels like filling. You are being diminished, but the diminishment masquerades as expansion. The highly sensitive person, with their finely tuned emotional instruments, becomes like a master chef preparing a feast for someone who can only taste through their tongue. You provide the flavors, the textures, the richness of experience that they cannot generate on their own. You become their emotional translator, their gateway to feelings they can observe but not inhabit, and because you are naturally giving, naturally nurturing, naturally inclined to heal and help and hold space for others, you do not recognize what is happening. You think you are in a relationship. You think you are building something together. You think you are loved for who you are, but what you are actually experiencing is being harvested for what you can provide. The predator feeds on your emotional responses. Your joy becomes their entertainment. Your pain becomes their power. Your confusion becomes their control. They learn to orchestrate your feelings like a conductor leading an orchestra, knowing exactly which notes to play to produce the symphony they desire. They become addicted to the intensity of your reactions, the depth of your responses, the richness of your inner world that they can access through you but never truly possess. This is why they are drawn specifically to highly sensitive people. Others might provide some of what they need, but you provide it in concentrated form. You are the difference between a candle and a bonfire, between a stream and an ocean, between a whisper and a symphony. You offer them an emotional experience so vivid, so consuming, that they become addicted to your presence in their life. But addiction is never about love. It is about need. It is about dependency. It is about what you can provide rather than who you are. And when the highly sensitive person begins to understand this distinction, when they start to see the difference between being valued and being used, the real journey begins. The journey of awakening to how your greatest gift has been weaponized against you. The journey of understanding that your sensitivity is not a flaw to be hidden, but a power to be protected. The journey of learning that not everyone who claims to understand you actually sees you, and not everyone who promises to love you is capable of love. This awakening is not comfortable. It shatters illusions you may have held for years. It forces you to question relationships you thought were sacred. It demands that you look at your own patterns, your own unconscious choices, your own role in attracting those who would consume rather than cherish your sensitivity. But this awakening is also the beginning of your liberation. Because once you understand the game, you can stop playing by rules that were designed to ensure your defeat. The predator does not operate through grand gestures or obvious manipulations. They work through what I call the slow erosion method. Like water wearing a waystone, they chip away at your reality one conversation at a time, one interaction at a time, one seemingly innocent comment at a time. They understand that the highly sensitive person's greatest fear is not being believed, not being understood, not being seen as credible when they speak their truth. So they begin to plant seeds of doubt about your own perceptions. When you mention that something they said hurt you, they respond with confusion. as if they cannot fathom how their words could have been interpreted that way. When you express concern about their behavior, they mirror that concern back at you, suggesting that perhaps you are being too sensitive, too reactive, too quick to assume negative intent. This is not gaslighting in the crude, obvious sense that most people understand. This is surgical gaslighting, performed by someone who has studied your particular psychology with the dedication of a doctoral candidate. They know exactly how to make you question yourself without appearing to question you. They know how to make you feel crazy while positioning themselves as the voice of reason. The highly sensitive person, already prone to self-doubt due to a lifetime of being told they feel too much, becomes fertile ground for this kind of manipulation. You begin to wonder if you are overreacting, if you are reading too much into things, if your sensitivity is actually a liability that distorts your perception of reality rather than enhances it. But here is what you must understand. Your sensitivity is not distorting reality. It is revealing reality. The predator's greatest fear is that you will trust your own perceptions, because your perceptions are accurate. They can feel your intuitive radar scanning them, detecting the emptiness behind their mask, sensing the calculation beneath their charm. So they must convince you that your radar is broken, that your internal compass spins wildly without direction. They accomplish this through a technique I call emotional ventriloquism. They project their own inner state onto you while claiming to be the stable, grounded one in the relationship. When they are angry, they accuse you of being hostile. When they are being deceptive, they question your honesty. When they are manipulating the situation, they claim you are trying to control them. The highly sensitive person, with their natural inclination towards self-reflection and personal responsibility, begins to internalize these accusations. You start to believe that maybe you are the problem. Maybe you are too intense, too demanding, too difficult to love. Maybe your sensitivity is not a gift, but a curse that drives people away and creates conflict where none should exist. This is the moment when the predator has achieved their greatest victory. They have not only gained access to your emotional resources, but they have convinced you to hand over the keys to your own inner kingdom. You begin to police your own sensitivity, to suppress your own intuition, to silence your own inner voice because you have been convinced it cannot be trusted. The relationship enters what I call the intermittent reinforcement phase. This is perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of the entire dynamic. The predator begins to alternate between periods of intense connection and periods of withdrawal, between moments of apparent understanding and moments of deliberate confusion, between episodes of seeming love and episodes of subtle cruelty. This inconsistency is not random, it is calculated. It is designed to create what psychologists call trauma bonding, a phenomenon where the victim becomes addicted to the very source of their pain because that source also occasionally provides relief. The highly sensitive person, already prone to intense emotional experiences, becomes trapped in a cycle of hope and despair that feels impossible to escape. During the connection phases, the predator returns to their original mirroring behavior. They become once again the understanding, empathetic, deeply feeling person who first captured your heart. They remind you of why you fell for them in the first place. They offer glimpses of the relationship you thought you were building, the connection you believed was real. But these moments are not genuine returns to authenticity. They are strategic reinforcements designed to keep you emotionally invested. The predator has learned that complete withdrawal would cause you to leave, but complete presence would give you too much power. So they create a carefully calibrated rhythm of approach and retreat that keeps you always reaching, always hoping, always believing that if you just try harder, love deeper, give more, you can recapture that initial magic. The withdrawal phases are equally strategic. The predator becomes distant, cold, seemingly indifferent to your emotional needs. They may become critical, pointing out your flaws with surgical precision. They may become unavailable, leaving you to wonder where they are and why they have suddenly become unreachable. They may become cruel, saying things that cut to the core of your deepest insecurities. But they never cross the line completely. They never become so obviously abusive that you have clear justification for leaving. Instead, they operate in the grey areas, in the spaces between clear right and wrong, where your sensitivity becomes a liability rather than an asset. They create situations where you feel hurt but cannot clearly articulate why, where you feel manipulated but cannot point to specific evidence, where you feel diminished but cannot identify the exact mechanism of your diminishment. This is the predator's greatest skill. They understand how to wound you in ways that leave no visible scars. They know how to damage your spirit while maintaining plausible deniability. They become masters of what I call invisible violence, harm that is real and devastating, but difficult to prove or explain to others. The highly sensitive person, caught in this web of intermittent reinforcement, begins to lose touch with their own reality. Your emotions become so constantly dysregulated that you can no longer trust your own responses. Your intuition becomes so clouded by hope and fear that you can no longer distinguish between genuine insight and anxious projection. You find yourself walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring your own behavior to avoid triggering the predator's withdrawal. You begin to edit yourself to suppress the very qualities that make you who you are in a desperate attempt to maintain the connection. You become a smaller, dimmer version of yourself, and you do it voluntarily because you have been convinced that your full self is too much to be loved. This is when the predator has achieved total energetic dominance. They have not only gained access to your emotional resources, but they have taught you to restrict your own supply. You have become complicit in your own diminishment, actively participating in the suppression of your own nature. But even in this darkest phase, something within you continues to resist. Some part of your authentic self refuses to be completely silenced. This is the part that feels uncomfortable with the relationship but cannot name why. The part that senses something is wrong but cannot identify what. The part that continues to feel hurt even when you cannot justify that hurt logically. This resistant part of you is not your paranoia or your oversensitivity or your tendency to create drama where none exists. This is your soul's immune system working overtime to protect what remains of your authentic self. This is your inner wisdom, speaking in whispers because it has been shouted down so many times that it no longer dares to speak aloud. The predator senses this resistance and works tirelessly to eliminate it. They increase their efforts to convince you that your discomfort is unfounded, that your concerns are irrational, that your pain is self-created. They may bring in allies, other people who corroborate their version of reality, and make you feel as though you are standing alone against a consensus that you are the problem. This is perhaps the most isolating aspect of the entire experience. The highly sensitive person, already prone to feeling different and misunderstood, finds themselves increasingly cut off from their own support systems. The predator may not forbid you from seeing friends and family, but they make it emotionally costly to maintain those relationships. They create drama around your other connections, question your loyalty to people who care about you, or simply make themselves so central to your emotional world that other relationships begin to feel peripheral and unimportant. You begin to lose yourself in the relationship not because you choose to, but because the relationship has been designed to consume your sense of self. You become so focused on managing the predator's moods, anticipating their needs, and avoiding their displeasure that you forget who you were before this dance began. But forgetting is not the same as losing. Even in your most diminished state, even when you feel like a shadow of your former self, the essence of who you are remains intact. It may be buried beneath layers of confusion and self-doubt, but it has not been destroyed. It cannot be destroyed because it is not dependent on external validation or recognition. It exists independent of anyone else's ability to see or appreciate it. This is the truth that the predator fears most, that beneath all their manipulation and control and energetic feeding, you remain fundamentally unownable, that your sensitivity, your depth, your capacity for genuine feeling cannot be permanently captured or contained, that you are not actually their prey, but a sovereign being who has temporarily forgotten your own power. The moment you begin to remember this truth is the moment the entire dynamic begins to shift. The predator may sense your awakening before you fully recognize it yourself. They may intensify their efforts to maintain control, becoming more charming or more cruel, more present or more absent, more loving or more threatening. But once the process of remembering has begun, it cannot be stopped. Once you start to question the reality you have been sold, once you begin to trust your own perceptions again, once you reconnect with the part of yourself that knows truth from performance, the spell begins to break. This breaking is not gentle. It is not a gradual, comfortable awakening. It is more like being struck by lightning, a sudden illumination that reveals the landscape you have been navigating in ways that are both clarifying and devastating. You see not only what has been done to you, but how you participated in your own diminishment. You understand not only how you were manipulated, but why you were such an effective target. This understanding brings with it a grief that is almost unbearable. You mourn not only for the time you lost, the energy you wasted, the pieces of yourself you surrendered, but also for the innocence you can never reclaim. You grieve for the part of you that believed love looked like what you experienced, that thought connection meant what you felt, that trusted so completely in someone who was never worthy of that trust. But this grief, devastating as it may be, is also sacred. It is the grief of awakening, the pain that comes when illusion finally gives way to truth. It is the price of reclaiming your own reality, and though the cost feels enormous, the alternative, remaining trapped in a web of deception, would have cost you infinitely more. The predator counts on your fear of this grief. They understand that once you see clearly, once you recognize the true nature of what you have been experiencing, you will have to make choices that feel impossible. You will have to acknowledge that the relationship you thought was healing you was actually harming you. You will have to admit that the person you believed understood you better than anyone was actually studying you like a specimen under glass. Most terrifyingly of all, you will have to face the possibility that your greatest gift, your sensitivity, your empathy, your capacity for deep feeling, has been the very thing that made you vulnerable to exploitation. This realization can feel like a betrayal of your own nature, a cosmic joke played by a universe that gave you the ability to feel everything but failed to provide you with the wisdom to protect that ability from those who would abuse it. But here is what you must understand about this moment of recognition. It is not a failure of your sensitivity. It is an initiation into its true power. The predator could only manipulate your gift because you did not yet understand its full nature. You experienced your sensitivity as an open wound rather than as a sword. You wielded it like a child handling fire, dangerous to yourself because you had not yet learned its properties, its potential, its proper use. The highly sensitive person who has been through this crucible emerges transformed, not broken, not hardened, not cynical, but alchemized. The same sensitivity that made you vulnerable now becomes your greatest protection. The same empathy that was exploited now becomes your most reliable compass. The same depth of feeling that was harvested now becomes the source of your unshakable knowing. You begin to understand that there is a vast difference between feeling with someone and feeling for someone, between empathy and absorption, between compassion and compliance, between love and enabling. These distinctions, which once seemed impossibly nuanced, now become as clear as the difference between light and shadow. Your nervous system, which had been hijacked and dysregulated by the predator's intermittent reinforcement, begins to remember its natural rhythms. You start to notice how different people affect your energy field, how certain interactions leave you drained while others leave you energized. You develop what I call energetic discernment, the ability to sense not just what someone is feeling, but whether their emotional state is authentic or performed. This discernment is not paranoia. It is not the hardening of your heart or the closing of your mind. It is the natural evolution of sensitivity from unconscious receptivity to conscious perception. You learn to feel without absorbing, to witness without becoming, to love without losing yourself in the process. The predator, sensing this shift in your energy, may make desperate attempts to recapture your attention. They may suddenly become the person they pretended to be in the beginning, showering you with the understanding and connection you once craved. They may manufacture crises that require your empathetic response, creating emergencies that seem to demand your immediate emotional investment. Or they may go in the opposite direction, becoming more openly hostile, more obviously manipulative, dropping the mask entirely in a last-ditch effort to maintain control through fear rather than seduction. They may threaten to expose your secrets, to turn others against you, to destroy the reputation you have worked so hard to build. But these tactics, which once would have terrified you into submission, now reveal themselves as the desperate flailings of someone who has lost their primary source of emotional sustenance. You recognize them not as evidence of the predator's power, but as proof of their fundamental weakness. They are showing you that without your energy to feed on, they have nothing. They are revealing the emptiness that your sensitivity always detected, but that you were taught to ignore. This is when you begin to understand something profound about the nature of predation itself. The predator is not powerful. They are starving. They do not choose highly sensitive people because they are weak, but because they are strong, because they possess something, emotional authenticity, spiritual depth, genuine feeling that the predator desperately needs but cannot generate within themselves. You were never their victim in the way you imagined. You were their life support system. You were the source of vitality they plugged into because their own inner world was a wasteland. They needed you infinitely more than you ever needed them, but they convinced you of the opposite through psychological sleight of hand. Understanding this dynamic does not minimize the harm that was done to you. It does not excuse the manipulation or justify the exploitation, but it does shift the power dynamic in a fundamental way. You begin to see that you were not chosen because you were weak, but because you were powerful. Not because you were flawed, but because you were whole. Not because you were easy prey, but because you were a feast. This realization can be simultaneously empowering and overwhelming. On one hand, it validates your worth in a way that perhaps nothing ever has before. It confirms that your sensitivity is not a liability, but an asset so valuable that others will go to extraordinary lengths to access it. On the other hand, it raises the terrifying question: if your greatest strength can be turned into your greatest vulnerability, how do you move forward in the world? How do you remain open without becoming a target? How do you love without inviting exploitation? The answer lies in what I call conscious sensitivity, the practice of feeling fully while maintaining complete sovereignty over your own energy field. This is not about building walls or becoming guarded. It is about developing the ability to extend your empathy without extending your boundaries, to offer your compassion without offering your soul as collateral. Conscious sensitivity requires you to develop a new relationship with your own emotional responses. Instead of assuming that everything you feel belongs to you, you learn to ask, is this mine? Is this emotion arising from my own inner landscape? Or am I picking up on something in my environment? Is this feeling a response to what is actually happening, or am I being manipulated into feeling it? These questions become your protective prayers, the mantras that keep you grounded in your own reality while remaining open to the experiences of others. They allow you to maintain your natural empathy while developing what might be called empathetic intelligence, the wisdom to know when your caring is being honored and when it is being harvested. You also begin to develop what I call energetic boundaries, invisible but impermeable barriers that protect your inner world while allowing genuine connection to flow freely. These boundaries are not walls built from fear or past hurt. They are more like membranes, permeable to love and truth, but impervious to manipulation and deception. Creating these boundaries requires you to first clearly define what is yours and what belongs to others. Your emotions, your thoughts, your spiritual energy, your life force, these are your sovereign territory. Others may witness them, may be moved by them, may even be transformed by them, but they do not get to control them, harvest them, or claim ownership over them. This distinction becomes the foundation of all your future relationships. You learn to share your gifts without surrendering your power, to be vulnerable without being available for exploitation, to love deeply while maintaining your center, to feel everything without absorbing anything that does not serve your highest good. The process of developing conscious sensitivity is not quick or easy. It requires you to constantly vigilant about your own patterns, your own unconscious tendencies to give too much too quickly to people who have not earned such access to your inner world. It demands that you learn to sit with the discomfort of not immediately soothing others' pain, not immediately filling others' emptiness, not immediately becoming whatever someone else needs you to be. This restraint feels unnatural at first because it goes against every instinct that has been conditioned into you. The highly sensitive person has often been trained from childhood to be the emotional thermostat for their environment, automatically adjusting their internal temperature to regulate the comfort of others. Learning to let others manage their own emotional climate while you tend to your own can feel selfish, cold, even cruel. But this is not selfishness. This is self-preservation. This is the recognition that you cannot heal anyone else's wounds by allowing them to infect yours. You cannot fill anyone else's emptiness by pouring out your own fullness. You cannot save anyone else from drowning by jumping into the water without a life vest. The predator will tell you otherwise. They will frame your newfound boundaries as evidence of your selfishness, your coldness, your failure to love properly. They will remind you of all the times they were there for you, all the ways they supported you, all the love they claimed to have given you. They will try to guilt you back into the old dynamic by suggesting that your withdrawal is a betrayal of everything you once shared. But you now have the wisdom to recognize these arguments for what they are: manipulation disguised as love, control masquerading as care, possession pretending to be partnership. You understand that genuine love does not require you to diminish yourself. Real connection does not demand that you sacrifice your sovereignty. Authentic intimacy does not cost you your sense of self. This understanding becomes your North Star, the fixed point by which you navigate all future relationships. You learn to distinguish between people who want to know you and people who want to own you, between those who celebrate your sensitivity and those who seek to exploit it, between connections that nourish your soul and entanglements that drain your life force. The highly sensitive person who has survived predation and emerged with their sensitivity intact but protected becomes a force unlike any other. They possess not only the natural gifts of empathy and perception, but also the hard-won wisdom of someone who has seen the shadow side of human nature and learned to navigate it without losing their light. They become what I call the awakened empath, someone who can feel everything without becoming everything they feel, who can love deeply without losing themselves in that love, who can offer compassion without offering themselves as a sacrifice, who can remain open-hearted in a world that often punishes such openness because they have learned to protect their heart without closing it. This transformation is not just personal, it is archetypal. The awakened empath serves as a beacon for others who are still trapped in predatory dynamics, showing them that it is possible to reclaim their power without sacrificing their nature. They demonstrate that sensitivity is not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be honored. They prove that it is possible to feel deeply in a shallow world without drowning in that depth. But perhaps most importantly, they serve as guardians of authentic connection in a world increasingly populated by those who mistake intensity for intimacy, possession for love, and consumption for care. They become living examples of what genuine relationship looks like, not the desperate clinging of two incomplete people trying to make themselves whole through each other, but the conscious choice of two sovereign beings to share their wholeness in service of something greater than themselves. The journey from unconscious sensitivity to conscious empathy is not one that anyone would choose voluntarily. It requires walking through fires that burn away illusions you thought were truths, facing mirrors that reflect aspects of yourself you would rather not see, and surrendering attachments that felt essential to your survival, but were actually obstacles to your growth. Yet those who complete this journey emerge with gifts that cannot be acquired any other way. They develop an intuitive radar so finely tuned that predators can no longer approach them undetected. They cultivate an inner compass so reliable that they can navigate even the most complex emotional terrain without losing their way. They embody a form of love so pure and powerful that it transforms everything it touches without being diminished in the process. This is the ultimate victory over predation, not just escape, but transformation, not just survival, but evolution, not just healing, but becoming more authentically yourself than you ever imagined possible. The predator sought to consume your light, but instead they catalyzed your awakening to just how bright that light truly is. And once you know your own radiance, once you understand your own worth, once you recognize your own power, you become unhuntable. Not because you have built walls around your heart, but because you have learned to guard the gates. Not because you have stopped feeling, but because you have learned to feel with wisdom. Not because you have given up on love, but because you have finally learned what love actually is. The predator who once seemed so powerful, so charismatic, so irresistibly attractive, now appears to you as they truly are, a hungry ghost, desperate for the very life force they sought to steal from you. And you, the one they tried to diminish, now stand in the full recognition of your own magnificence, your own sovereignty, your own unassailable worth. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of the chapter where you write your own rules, choose your own connections, and love from a place of wholeness rather than woundedness. This is where you stop being prey and start being predator to nothing but your own limitations, your own fears, your own willingness to settle for less than you deserve. The hunt is over. The hunted has become the hunter of truth, of authentic connection, of relationships worthy of the gift you are. And in that transformation, something sacred is restored, not just to your own life, but to the world itself. The awakened empath learns to recognize something that the unconscious sensitive person never understood. There are layers to predation that exist far beneath the surface of obvious manipulation. The most dangerous predators are not those who announce their hunger with crude tactics or transparent lies. They are the ones who have studied the architecture of the sensitive soul with the dedication of a scholar and the patience of a surgeon. These are what I call the evolved predators, and they represent the most sophisticated form of energetic vampirism that exists in our world. They do not simply mirror your sensitivity back to you as the amateur manipulator does, they become your sensitivity. They do not just pretend to understand your inner world, they inhabit it so completely that you begin to question where you end and they begin. The evolved predator has learned that the highly sensitive person's greatest vulnerability is not their tendency to feel too much, but their desperate need to be understood at the deepest levels of their being. You have spent your entire life feeling like a stranger in a strange land, speaking a language that few others comprehend. Your emotional vocabulary is rich and nuanced in ways that most people cannot appreciate. Your inner landscape is populated with subtleties and complexities that seem invisible to the majority of humanity. So when someone appears who not only speaks your language, but seems to have authored the very dictionary you have been using to understand yourself, the effect is intoxicating beyond measure. This is not simple recognition. This is revelation. This is not mere acceptance. This is worship of the very qualities you have been taught to hide or diminish. The evolved predator does not just validate your sensitivity, they elevate it to the status of the sacred. They speak of your empathy as if it were a divine gift, your intuition as if it were prophecy, your emotional depth as if it were the eighth wonder of the world. They position themselves not as your equal in sensitivity, but as your devoted student, your humble witness, your most faithful interpreter. This strategy is devastatingly effective because it addresses the highly sensitive person's core wound, the belief that their nature is somehow flawed, excessive, or unwelcome in a world that seems to prefer emotional simplicity over spiritual complexity. The evolved predator becomes the antidote to a lifetime of feeling too much in a world that feels too little. But what you are experiencing is not genuine appreciation, it is strategic idealization. The predator is not falling in love with your authentic self. They are falling in love with their ability to control your authentic self through the mechanism of false worship. They understand that the fastest way to possess someone is to convince them that they are being treasured beyond measure. This creates what I call the golden cage dynamic. Unlike the crude predator who seeks to diminish and control through obvious manipulation, the evolved predator seeks to possess through elevation. They build you a beautiful prison made of praise, admiration, and seemingly unconditional acceptance. The bars are invisible because they are forged from your own need to be seen and valued for who you truly are. The evolved predator studies not just your emotional patterns, but your spiritual beliefs, your deepest philosophies, your most cherished dreams about what relationship could be. They become fluent in the language of your soul, speaking to you in concepts and terms that resonate so deeply that you feel as though you have found your missing piece, your cosmic complement, your destined partner in the dance of existence. They may speak of twin flames and soul contracts, of karmic connections and divine appointments. They weave narratives of spiritual significance around your relationship that make leaving feel not just difficult, but spiritually irresponsible. How can you walk away from something that feels so fated, so cosmically orchestrated, so obviously blessed by forces greater than your individual will? This spiritual manipulation is perhaps the most insidious form of predation because it hijacks not just your emotions and psychology, but your connection to meaning itself. The relationship becomes more than a bond between two people. It becomes a sacred mission, a spiritual assignment, a test of your faith in love itself. The evolved predator may position themselves as your spiritual teacher, your guide into deeper levels of consciousness and awareness. They offer to show you aspects of yourself you never knew existed, to unlock potentials you never imagined you possessed. They become the key to your own inner kingdom, and gradually you begin to believe that without them, you cannot access the deepest chambers of your own soul. This creates a dependency that goes far beyond emotional attachment. You begin to rely on them not just for love and companionship, but for your very sense of spiritual identity. They become the mirror through which you see your own divinity, the translator through which you understand your own purpose, the gateway through which you access your own power. But here is what the evolved predator understands about this dynamic that you may not. They are not actually connecting with your spirituality, they are colonizing it. They are not helping you discover your divine nature. They are claiming ownership of it. They are not serving as your spiritual partner. They are positioning themselves as your spiritual sovereign. The relationship that emerges from this foundation is unlike anything most people ever experience. It feels transcendent, transformative, absolutely essential to your continued evolution as a conscious being. You find yourself thinking not just about how much you love them, but about how spiritually advanced your connection is, how rare and precious this level of understanding must be, how blessed you are to have found someone who can meet you at such profound depths. The evolved predator feeds on this spiritual inflation. They harvest not just your emotional energy, but your connection to the sacred itself. They position themselves as the mediator between you and your own divine nature, gradually convincing you that your spiritual gifts are somehow incomplete without their presence to witness and validate them. This is when the golden cage begins to reveal its true nature. What felt like spiritual partnership begins to feel like spiritual dependency. What seemed like divine connection begins to reveal itself as sophisticated control. What appeared to be sacred love begins to show its true face as energetic colonization. The highly sensitive person trapped in this dynamic faces a unique form of suffering. Unlike the victim of crude manipulation who can point to obvious abuse and name it as such, you are dealing with something far more subtle and therefore far more crazy-making. How do you explain to others that you are being harmed by someone who seems to worship you? How do you describe feeling controlled by someone who appears to celebrate your freedom? How do you name the pain of being spiritually colonized by someone who speaks the language of divine love? The evolved predator counts on this confusion. They understand that the more sophisticated their manipulation, the less likely you are to recognize it as manipulation at all. They know that by framing their control in spiritual terms, they make it nearly impossible for you to resist without feeling as though you are betraying not just them, but your own highest nature. They may speak of your resistance to their influence as evidence of your spiritual immaturity, your fear of true intimacy, your inability to surrender to divine love. They reframe your healthy instincts for autonomy as spiritual deficiency, your need for boundaries as emotional limitation, your desire for independence as failure to embrace unity consciousness. This creates a double bind that can drive the highly sensitive person to the brink of madness. Your intuition tells you that something is wrong, but your spiritual beliefs have been weaponized against that very intuition. Your soul cries out for freedom, but that cry has been reinterpreted as resistance to spiritual growth. Your authentic self rebels against the colonization, but that rebellion has been labeled as ego-driven separation from divine love. The evolved predator may introduce practices and beliefs that further cement their control while appearing to support your spiritual development. They might encourage meditation techniques that make you more susceptible to their influence, spiritual practices that increase your dependency on their guidance, or belief systems that position them as essential to your spiritual evolution. They become your guru without ever claiming the title, your spiritual authority without ever admitting to the role. They guide your inner development in directions that serve their needs while convincing you that you are being led toward your highest good. They shape your spiritual identity in their image while making you believe you are discovering your authentic self. The relationship becomes a closed system where all roads lead back to them. Your spiritual insights are validated only when they align with their worldview. Your psychic perceptions are trusted only when they confirm their version of reality. Your connection to divine guidance is honored only when it supports their agenda for your life together. This spiritual isolation is perhaps the most devastating aspect of evolved predation. The crude predator may cut you off from friends and family, but the evolved predator cuts you off from your own inner knowing, your own connection to truth, your own ability to distinguish between divine guidance and sophisticated manipulation. You begin to lose access to the very gifts that made you attractive to the predator in the first place. Your intuition becomes cloudy because you have been taught to doubt it whenever it conflicts with their perspective. Your empathy becomes confused because you can no longer distinguish between genuine feeling and projected emotion. Your spiritual perception becomes distorted because it has been filtered through their interpretive framework for so long that you no longer remember what your own unmediated experience feels like. The evolved predator feeds on this confusion. The more disconnected you become from your own inner authority, the more dependent you become on their interpretation of reality. The more you doubt your own spiritual discernment, the more you rely on theirs. The more you question your own connection to the divine, the more essential their mediation becomes. This is the ultimate goal of evolved predation, not just to harvest your energy, but to become the sole source of your spiritual validation. Not just to control your behavior, but to colonize your consciousness. Not just to possess your love, but to own your very conception of what love is and how it operates in the world. The highly sensitive person caught in this web faces a spiritual crisis of the highest order. Everything you thought you knew about divine love, spiritual partnership, and sacred relationship has been turned inside out and used against you. The very qualities that you believed connected you to the divine have become the chains that bind you to someone who speaks of God but serves only themselves. Breaking free from evolved predation requires more than just recognizing manipulation. It requires reclaiming your own spiritual sovereignty. It demands that you separate your authentic connection to the sacred from the colonized version that has been shaped by someone else's needs and agenda. It requires you to trust your own inner knowing, even when that knowing has been systematically undermined and called into question. This process of spiritual decolonization is perhaps the most challenging work a highly sensitive person can undertake. It means questioning not just the relationship, but the entire spiritual framework within which that relationship has been constructed. It means examining every belief, every practice, every insight that has been shaped by the predator's influence and asking, is this truly mine, or has this been planted within me to serve someone else's purposes? The evolved predator will resist this examination with every tool at their disposal. They may accuse you of spiritual regression, of closing your heart, of betraying the divine love you once shared. They may remind you of all the beautiful experiences you have had together, all the profound insights you have received through their guidance, all the spiritual growth you have achieved under their tutelage. But you must remember that even genuine spiritual experiences can be weaponized by someone who understands how to manipulate the sacred for profane purposes. The fact that you may have had real insights, authentic moments of connection, or genuine spiritual breakthroughs does not validate the overall dynamic. Evolved predators are skilled at weaving threads of truth into tapestries of deception, creating experiences that feel divinely inspired while serving entirely earthly purposes. The process of reclaiming your spiritual sovereignty begins with a simple but revolutionary act: trusting your own direct experience of the divine over anyone else's interpretation of what that experience means. It means returning to the source of your own spiritual knowing and learning to distinguish between authentic guidance and sophisticated manipulation disguised as spiritual truth. This is not easy work. The evolved predator has spent considerable time and energy convincing you that your unmediated spiritual experience is somehow incomplete, unreliable, or inferior to the insights available through relationship with them. They have positioned themselves as the lens through which divine truth becomes clear, the translator through which cosmic wisdom becomes comprehensible. But the truth is that your sensitivity is itself a direct line to divine intelligence. Your empathy is itself a form of prayer. Your capacity for deep feeling is itself a sacred gift that requires no external validation or interpretation. The evolved predator has convinced you that these gifts need their presence to be fully realized, but this is the fundamental lie upon which their entire system of control is built. Your spiritual gifts are yours. They existed before the predator arrived, they will exist after the predator is gone, and they continue to exist even while the predator works to convince you otherwise. The divine does not require a middleman, and your soul does not need an interpreter. Your connection to the sacred is direct, immediate, and unmediated by any human authority, no matter how spiritually sophisticated they may appear to be. Recognizing this truth is the beginning of your liberation from evolved predation. But recognition is only the first step. The real work lies in learning to trust this direct connection even when it has been systematically undermined, even when it conflicts with everything you have been taught to believe about spiritual relationship, even when acting on this trust means walking away from what appears to be the most spiritually significant connection of your lifetime. The evolved predator has invested considerable energy in convincing you that leaving them would be a spiritual mistake of cosmic proportions. They have woven narratives of destiny and divine purpose around your relationship that make departure feel like betrayal not just of them, but of the divine plan itself. They have made themselves seem so essential to your spiritual evolution that leaving feels like spiritual suicide. But here is what you must understand. Any spiritual teaching, practice, or relationship that requires you to betray your own inner knowing is not serving your highest good, no matter how beautifully it may be packaged. Any divine love that demands you surrender your sovereignty is not divine at all, but something far more earthly and self-serving, masquerading as sacred truth. The divine does not require you to diminish yourself in order to serve it. God does not demand that you silence your inner voice in order to hear divine guidance. The universe does not ask you to sacrifice your autonomy in order to participate in its grand design. Any spiritual framework that suggests otherwise is serving human ego, not divine will. This understanding becomes your compass as you navigate the treacherous terrain of spiritual decolonization. Every belief, every practice, every insight that asks you to betray your own inner authority must be examined with the deepest skepticism, no matter how sacred it may appear to be, no matter how spiritually advanced the person teaching it may seem to be. The evolved predator has taught you to distrust your own spiritual discernment, but that discernment is precisely what you need to reclaim in order to free yourself from their influence. You must learn to feel the difference between authentic spiritual truth and sophisticated spiritual manipulation, between divine guidance and human control dressed up in cosmic language. This discernment is not intellectual, it is felt. It lives in your body, in your nervous system, in the subtle energy field that surrounds and interpenetrates your being. The evolved predator may speak in spiritual language, but their energy signature tells a different story. Learning to read this energetic information is crucial to protecting yourself from future predation and reclaiming your own spiritual authority. When you are in the presence of authentic spiritual truth, your nervous system relaxes, your energy expands, your inner light brightens. You feel more connected to yourself, not less. You feel more sovereign, not more dependent. You feel more capable of direct divine connection, not more in need of external mediation. When you are in the presence of spiritual manipulation, the opposite occurs. Your nervous system becomes agitated, even if your mind is convinced that you are receiving divine truth. Your energy contracts. Your inner light dims. You feel more disconnected from yourself, more dependent on external validation, more convinced that you need someone else to interpret your spiritual experiences for you. Learning to trust these subtle energetic signals over the more obvious mental and emotional responses is crucial to developing immunity to evolved predation. The predator is skilled at manipulating your thoughts and feelings, but they cannot manipulate the deeper energetic truth that your body and soul recognize even when your mind has been convinced otherwise. This energetic discernment becomes your early warning system, alerting you to predatory dynamics before they have a chance to fully establish themselves. It allows you to recognize spiritual manipulation in its earliest stages before you become emotionally and psychologically entangled in systems of control that masquerade as systems of love. The highly sensitive person who has developed this level of energetic discernment becomes nearly impossible to manipulate through spiritual means. They can appreciate the beauty of spiritual language and concepts without being seduced by those who would use such language for personal gain. They can participate in spiritual practices and communities without losing their individual connection to divine truth. Most importantly, they can love deeply and spiritually without surrendering their sovereignty. They understand that true spiritual partnership supports each person's individual connection to the divine rather than replacing it. They recognize that authentic sacred relationship enhances both people's spiritual autonomy rather than creating dependency. This understanding transforms not just their ability to recognize and avoid predators, but their entire approach to spiritual relationship itself. They no longer seek someone to complete their spiritual journey, but someone to walk alongside them as they each pursue their own direct connection to divine truth. They no longer look for a spiritual teacher disguised as a romantic partner, but for a spiritual equal who honors their own inner authority while sharing their own authentic insights. The awakened, highly sensitive person becomes a beacon for others who are still trapped in dynamics of spiritual predation or who are seeking authentic spiritual partnership in a world filled with sophisticated manipulation. They demonstrate that it is possible to be deeply spiritual without being spiritually naive, profoundly loving without being energetically available for exploitation, completely open-hearted without being completely unguarded. They serve as living proof that sensitivity and discernment are not opposites but partners, that empathy and boundaries can coexist, that divine love and human wisdom can work together to create relationships that serve both individual sovereignty and collective evolution. But perhaps most importantly, they embody the truth that your spiritual gifts are your own, that your connection to the divine is direct and unmediated, and that no human being, no matter how spiritually sophisticated they may appear to be, has the right to colonize your consciousness or claim ownership of your soul. This is the ultimate victory over evolved predation. Not just escape from a particular predator, but the development of spiritual immunity that makes future predation impossible. Not just healing from spiritual abuse, but the cultivation of spiritual sovereignty that can never again be compromised by those who would use the sacred for profane purposes. The journey from spiritual naivety to spiritual sovereignty is not one that anyone would choose voluntarily, but it is perhaps the most important journey a highly sensitive person can make. It transforms you from someone who seeks spiritual validation from others into someone who trusts their own direct connection to divine truth. It changes you from someone who can be manipulated through spiritual language into someone who can discern authentic spiritual truth from sophisticated spiritual deception. And in making this transformation, you become not just immune to predation, but a guardian of authentic spirituality in a world where the sacred is too often used to serve the profane. You become a protector of those who are still vulnerable to spiritual manipulation, a teacher of spiritual discernment, a living example of what it means to be both deeply spiritual and completely sovereign. The predator sought to colonize your consciousness, but instead they catalyzed your awakening to the truth of your own spiritual authority. They tried to make themselves essential to your divine connection, but instead they taught you that no one is essential to that connection except you and the divine itself. This is the paradox of evolved predation. In trying to possess your spirituality, the predator ultimately liberates you into a more authentic and sovereign relationship with the sacred than you might ever have achieved otherwise. In attempting to become your spiritual authority, they force you to discover the unshakable spiritual authority that lives within your own soul, and once you have tasted that authority, once you have experienced that direct connection, once you have felt the truth of your own spiritual sovereignty, you can never again be convinced that you need anyone else to mediate your relationship with the divine. You become, in the deepest sense, unhuntable, not because you have closed your heart, but because you have learned to guard the gates of your soul with the wisdom of someone who knows exactly how precious and powerful what lies within truly is.